2. And check the left side. When you FOIL this together, do you get this trinomial up here? Hopefully you do. You should be. So now the difference is this is set equal to 0. We want to figure out what values of x make the equation or actually equal 0 then. So using the zero product property, if I can just figure out what value makes this factor become 0, if this whole factor right here becomes 0, 0 times, I don't care what number this even is, 0 times anything does equal 0. So what makes x plus 6 equal 0? You solve that equation. And similarly, if I can make this whole factor become 0, 0 times anything is 0. So that's how I get my second solution. There is a second solution on a lot of these quadratic equations. So I'm subtracting 6 from each side. I get x equals -6. That is the solution. And over here, I'm going to add 2. I didn't need to put parentheses around that binomial. I just did it from the factored form up above. 2 is my other solution. Number 2, again, you don't start factoring until it's set equal to 0. So subtract 32 from the right side to get it to equal 0. But what you do on the right, you have to do on the left. And then realize you can't combine this with either of the other two unique terms. So we just string it along at the end. -2x squared plus 16x minus 32 equals 0. Now, if you recall in the notes, the top part of your notes here always says to look for a greatest common factor. And this has a greatest common factor. I can factor a 2 or a -2 out of all of these terms. I'm going to factor out a -2 because I like to have a positive leading coefficient if possible. So -2, actually it's always possible. You can always factor out a negative, even just a -1. So that gives me x squared. This gives me -8x because a -8x times a -2 is a positive 16x. And then plus 16 equals 0. And I like that when I take out a GCF, I do like mentally distribute that back in, realizing that when you factor out a negative value, it switches all of the signs. So the negatives terms went to positives, and the positive term went to a negative. So now I'm going to try to factor what is left in the parentheses, this trinomial. And now that I factored out a -2, I can use the easy method because my leading coefficient is now just 1. So looking for numbers that multiply to 16 and add to -8, -4 and -4 do that. So I get x minus 4 times x minus 4. Bring down your leading your greatest common factor, that -2 that we factored out from all the terms. And recall, we also have an equation that equals 0. So bring down your equals 0. And we're trying to solve this equation. And so we take our factors and set them equal to 0. Now this actually has 3 factors. But because this first factor, this greatest common factor, this -2, doesn't have a variable with it, I can't set that factor equal to 0 and solve for a variable. So it's only this factor and that factor. If I were able to factor out an x with the -2, then I would set -2x equal to 0. So x minus 4 is going to get set equal to 0, and so is this other factor, but hopefully you're realizing it's kind of silly because they're both the same factors. So you're going to get 4 as a solution here, and you would also get 4 as a solution over there. So here this trinomial actually only has one solution. It's x equals 4. Alright, this one is set equal to 0. That's awesome, and there is no GCF. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to -30 and add to 1. So that's that's positive 6 and -5. So I can rewrite this equation as x plus 6 times x minus 5 equals 0. So now take your factors, and again I'm also quickly mentally foiling this back together and making sure I get that. So this solution will be a -6 because -6 plus 6 is 0. What makes this become 0? -6. And then I'm mentally or physically going to write out x minus 5 equals 0. I want to know what makes this become 0. And positive 5 would make that factor become 0. So that's a solution. set it equal to 0 first. So now we're trying to factor 25x squared plus 20x plus 4 and set it equal to 0. Well, folks, I could do our diamond with 120, and you can do that. But I'm also realizing that the square root of 25x squared is 5x. So I'm thinking the square root is 5x, and here the square root of 4 is 2. So I believe this can be written as 5x plus 2 times 5x plus 2, and then FOIL that together, make sure that works. And it does. And really, we could also write this as 5x plus 2 because the factors are exactly the same. 5x plus 2 quantity squared equals 0. So really, I just need to set one of these factors equal to 0 because they are the same factor. So I subtract 2, and then I divide by 5. So x equals negative 2/5. Number 5, subtract 21 to get this set equal to 0. So we get 2x squared minus x minus 21 equals 0. There is not a greatest common factor I can take out of this. So I'm going to proceed to the diamond method. I need to take my a times c value though because there is a leading coefficient. So that gives me negative 42 and negative 1. So numbers that multiply to negative 42 and add to negative 1, that gives me negative 7 and 6. So I get x minus 7, but then because there was a leading coefficient, divide that by 2, times x plus 6 divided by 2 equals 0. And so simplify this fraction. Well, you actually can't. It's 7/2. Simplify this fraction, you can. It's 3/1. So remember, we take our new simplified denominator. I shouldn't say new. We take our simplified denominator and put that in front of as a coefficient of x. So it's 2x. And then once we take the coefficient and we put it in front, we'll just write the, once we take the denominator and move it as the coefficient, we write down the simplified numerator. Let me try that one more time. So take the simplified denominator, put it in front of the x, bring down the simplified numerator. It's a bit magical, folks. Like weird, and almost magical in a bad way. Like, why are we doing this? Well, we don't know the why. We can check it and make sure it works. And it does work when you check it. So it's kind of then when it works, you're like, oh, that's actually kind of cool in a magical way. But we haven't solved the equation, folks. So take your factors, set them equal to 0. So negative 3 is going to be the solution over here. I got excited because it was an easy equation to solve. Negative 3 is the solution. Now here, take your time, add 7 to each side. 2x equals 7, so x equals 7/2. Positive 7/2. Notice it's actually the opposite of whatever our simplified fraction was. All right, let's try this one in blue. This one, actually, we're going to talk about tomorrow. Like, this one's really easy and really fast, but let's just, it's good to have methods that work, folks. And so even if, like, we teach you faster methods, it's good to use those. It's good to have all those tools in your arsenal. But this factoring method will work. So I set it equal to 0. Now I'm going to factor it. But I do notice that there's only 2 terms. And if there's 2 terms, you're thinking, well, could I square root each term? Because then it could be difference of squares. Yeah, the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 81 is 9. So this actually factors to x plus 9 times x minus 9. But again, if you don't like that tool, you could just realize that your b value is 0. So you could write this as x squared plus 0x minus 81 equals 0 and do the diamond thing, negative 81 and 0. When you do negative 81 and 0, you get 9 and negative 9. When you put it into factored form, you get this. So one answer is x equals negative 9. Ooh, it's not writing very well. Come on, Mr. P. You get x equals -9 for this first factor set equal to 0, solved for, and you get +9 over here. Set it equal to 0. We get 4x squared plus 14x plus 6 equals 0. Look at all those even numbers, folks. I can factor a 2 out of there. So I get 2x squared plus 7x plus 3 equals 0. So we're going to make a diamond on this one. Numbers that multiply to 6, that's 2 times 3, plus 7. We get 6 and 1. So bring your 2 out in front, folks, and we're going to get x plus 6 over 2 times x plus 1 over 2 equals 0. Bring your simplified denominator over, but let's actually simplify that. So we're going to get 1x plus 3 and then 2x plus 1 equals 0. Make sure that when you FOIL this part back together, notice this part already has the 2 factored out as the GCF. So go back to the last step where we actually had the 2 factored out. Do these 2 factors or binomials multiply together get you this trinomial? And it does, which is awesome. So then we set those factors equal to 0. So -3 is going to be one of them. And then maybe you're starting to see what it's always going to be. Or maybe you're catching a pattern with that, but I'm going to solve it. On a test, it's best to solve it because sometimes those little shortcuts for solving get us in trouble. If you do a shortcut, double check, make sure it's correct. Please. -1/2. And yeah, 2 times -1/2 is -1. -1 plus 1 is 0, so that works. Holy cats. Let's solve this thing equal to 0. So I'm subtracting x squared. Now actually we'll do that from, I'll take an x squared away from the 3x squared. And then subtract 2x. So I'll subtract 2x from the already -1x, and I'll add 5 to the -40. Take your time here, folks. So we get 2x squared minus 3x minus 35 equals nothing now. There is no GCF, so we're looking for numbers that multiply to -70 and add to -3. So I'm thinking about all my factors of 70, but I'm making one positive and one negative. So really I'm looking for what 2 factors multiply, which numbers multiply to 70, but are only different by 3. 7 and 10. And I'll make the 10 negative, because when I add -10 to 7, I get -3. So we're going x minus 10 over 2 and x plus 7 over 2 equals 0. Simplify those fractions. This becomes 5 over 1. 7 over 2 does not simplify. So I will move my simplified denominator in front of the x as the coefficient, but I'm not going to actually write the 1. Bring down the minus sign. Keep the simplified numerator. Move the simplified denominator in front of the x, so it's 2x. Bring down the simplified numerator. And if I FOIL that together, I'm checking to make sure that I get this trinomial right here, and I do. Yes, okay. So now, set each of these factors equal to 0. Well, I know what this one's going to be, +5. And this one will be -7/2.